Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show on a Friday. I am Nicholas Lorimer, today joined from the East Rand by Mr. Morris Roodt. Morris, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick. I've just realized that I'm the only one on the show today is from a proper part of the country. The rest of you in that European fishing village cosplaying as an African city.
Indeed, joining us from said fishing village is Mr. Chris Patterson. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. No complaints.
Always the worst way to be, just going into a weekend. We're also joined today by Michael Morris. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And I'm very pleased to see in the images of the two of you, both fellow Cape Townians, that you each have a globe in the setting behind you. So I think this is something to be said for Cape Town. We're in touch with the world. We're much more worldly. We have a kind of global outlook, more expansive.
I have complicated feelings on this because, of course, I'm a transplant from the interior of the country, and I'm not a huge fan of the sea because it's a big, scary, wet ball of terror, as far as I'm concerned. But I did get tired of broken municipal services and not having water in my pipes, so I guess I'm just going to have to put up with the sea in order to avoid that kind of thing.
And I'm from Kimberley also. My heart lies in the hinterland. So I'm with you, Morris, in spirit. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like they say, the only problem with Cape Town is all the Cape Townians. Apart from that, it's a great place.
First time I heard that.
All right. Well, let's. Michael was saying before the show that we need to disagree with each other more on the podcast, and I think that is absolute rubbish, and there's no reason for us to disagree. But that aside, let's get into our first story of today, and this is more great stuff from Professor William Gumede from the Wits School of Governance, who has been laying on the criticism of BEE in a just a aggressive, targeted way that I think has been really excellent recently. He's been making the case that BEE has led to increased poverty, unemployment, and inequality in South Africa. He said BEE across Africa has failed because it focused on benefiting a small group of connected individuals rather than a large group of people. He said that according to calculations he had done, quote, conservatively, 1 trillion rand has been moved between under 100 people since 1994. The same people have been empowered and re-empowered over and over. South Africa's BEE model has created a model of corruption because people set up companies just to get a contract. He went on to say that genuine South African entrepreneurs who are not politically connected basically don't have a shot at getting anything out of the empowerment system. He said that companies who had spent the money on housing for Black South Africans or sponsoring schools in Soweto would have delivered a much wider impact rather than just sort of handing out shares to people or buying from businesses that are 50%, 100% Black owned, whatever the point system says. And Morris, I think for me, and we talk about this often, but this really in so many ways is the kind of crux of the the way our BEE policies have worked out, is, we had the president almost kind of admitting that this was the point of BEE in Parliament the other day when he said that he talked about the benefit of BEE being that you were essentially creating Black industrialists who were very rich. That's not what he said, but that's what he implied. And when you kind of strip away all of the emotional stuff and the historical discussion and all of this around BEE, Morris, you get to this point where you realize that you are taking money from the fiscus, which in some cases means money from the poor, and you are giving it to a group of business owners. Now, normally you'd expect the Communist Party to have something to say about this because it's so twisted and would seem like comically evil wealth extraction from the poor and middle class. But this 1 trillion rand figure, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. It's, I think it's a good way of putting it. You're taking from the poor and giving to the rich and the already connected. And you can say the point of BE is to make up for the sins of the past and all that kind of thing, and maybe you can kind of agree with it, but you got to, as the saying goes, you have to look at the outcome of a policy, not its intention. And BE has obviously not worked in South Africa. If it had worked, we wouldn't have poverty that's basically been the same since 2010. We wouldn't have a decline in GDP per capita. We wouldn't have unemployment of close to 50%, and with probably in real terms more than half of Black South Africans unemployed. It simply hasn't worked. And we've also seen how the benefits of BE, as you say, have accrued to a very small number of people. We've also seen, if you look at the inequality numbers, the single race group where inequality has gone up since 1994, the only one actually, and where the inequality is the highest is Black South Africans, because obviously the benefits of democracy and economic growth and so on has accrued to a very small number of people. And yeah, it's and also you and B, you can maybe argue it's worked in some ways, because actually out of the top 1% and top 10% of wealth in South Africa, there's probably more Black people in those groups than white people now. But so we've created a lot of rich Black people, which is fine, but we haven't. Some of it's obviously come from normal economic activity, but a lot of it's come from kind of cronyism, which is a problem. And it's actually quite bizarre. I put it on Twitter the other day. I said, if a genie came to ANC and said you can have 6% economic growth and 10% unemployment, but you have to get rid of NHR and EWC and BE and so on, the party would probably say no. And what was very telling, there was a lot of people who replied to me who said, well, we don't want the 6% economic growth. We want Black people to be uplifted. But the way you will uplift Black people is if you have 6% economic growth. BE simply, it also doesn't work because we carry on trying to divide up a pie that hasn't grown in real terms for 15 years. That is not how, and if you took all the wealth from every single white South African and you all the income, all the assets, and you divide it equally amongst Black South Africans, each Black South African would get a little windfall, but maybe $1,000, or let's be extravagant, say 20,000 rand. That's not life-changing money. It'll keep some people out of they'll be able to buy food for a couple of months, but that's about it. It's not going to change anybody's life. The only way to get rid of poverty sustainably and to change people's lives is to get high economic growth. And this isn't some magic formula that you have to have read, have read the whatever the Cryptonomicon or whatever it is, that Cthulhu's secret Bible or whatever the case is. Look around the world. Every single country around the world which has reduced poverty has not done it through taking money and giving it to poor people. They've taken it from growing the economy. Doesn't matter, and this is across the world. It's not even a cultural thing or whatever. It's happening in Asia. It's happening in Europe. You can even say it's happening in parts of Africa. It's economic growth is the only way you get rid of poverty and how you empower people, not taking from people who already have. I think it was Abraham Lincoln said, you can't strengthen the poor by weakening the strong, and that's exactly it.
Yeah, there's this sort of bizarre fascination with kind of like what is, who is sitting in a Santon restaurant, and that is like the barometer of how the society is changing. And some people will say, oh, you see, look, most people in a Santon restaurant nowadays are Black rather than white, and that means that BE has succeeded. Or they'll say, no, you see, actually, if you go to the restaurant around the corner, most people are still white, and therefore transformation has failed. And it's just such a bizarre discussion because we have almost half the country who wants jobs sitting unemployed. And that is just a horrifying statistic, which represents the experience of the vast majority of human beings in this country. And yet we have this kind of almost entirely elite-focused internal discussion on BE, where transformation has come to mean who's in the senior management rather than changing the society from a poor one to a wealthy one. That being said, Chris, I do get the feeling that the winds are shifting in this debate. Now, I don't think the EFF or ANC or MK are going to embrace, non-racialism anytime soon. But that being said, I think South Africans more and more, even who may have agreed with the sort of non-racial approach and the failures of BE as a kind of in the abstract, are getting more focused on this debate and agreeing that it's really failed. And I think, of that News 24 survey, which kind of corroborated some of the things we've found, that BE is really not as popular as people make it out to be. I don't know. Do you think I'm wish casting here? What do you think things are going better in our direction, Chris?
I do think things are going in our direction, not wishful thinking. 76.3% of South African voters in our latest polling would choose tax-funded vouchers over current empowerment policies. So I definitely think it's in our favor. The only thing I think is that Cyril Ramaphosa is sticking his head in the sand by saying that he's baffled by the link that BE is sort of made to low economic growth. I think he has a economic advisory council. What is that economic advisory council telling him? Is it telling him what he wants to hear, or is it telling him the truth?
No, I completely agree with that, because I mean, what the president didn't mention was that the majority of South Africans in that News 24 poll I'm mentioning agreed with us that BE is in fact hurting economic growth, including a significant number of people who supported BE, and this, I think, is shows that the sort of conversation in Parliament has gotten wildly out of step with what South Africans actually feel. Let me just kind of attach our next story to this one before I come to you, Michael. I saw this piece, and it was titled "ANC's Survival at Mercy of Courts as DA Challenges its Transformation Laws," and it has some commentary here from political analyst Dirk Coetzee, who says that the DA has taken the ANC to court on a bunch of these policy disagreements, right? On BE requirements, the Employment Act, which says each sector has to have all these targets for racial composition, NHI, BE, these kind of things are all being challenged in court. And the impression I get, and I don't know if I'm misunderstanding the professor here, but he says that if these cases succeed and the ANC fails in its transformation agenda, it could be the nail in the coffin of the party. And that the ANC is under immense pressure to win the transformation fight, because failure to do so threatens its very survival on delivering to the party's constituency. And Michael, I kind of think that this is sort of getting it wrong. If the ANC loses these court battles, I think it's actually going to get more popular, because it will not be able to implement the policies that are hurting South Africans, and South Africans will then have their lives get better and reward the ANC. I don't know. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Our former boss, Franz Grenier, I think would often referred to research which showed the correlation, the kind of tracking correlation between households' income security and socioeconomic, advantage or comfort, well-being, with the performance of the ANC. And over a long period, he tracked these figures. And whenever households were really feeling the pinch, ANC support declined. When things were, people were feeling better, had more cash in hand, just more comfortable, well off, ANC performance improved. So, it makes absolute sense. It's funny that people kind of doubt that fundamental logic. South Africans will be much happier about their governance if they are personally feeling that they are being well governed, and that reflects in food on the table. Morris has often referred to the fact that all the figures that we often talk about register as real people sitting down to supper. Is there supper on the table? Does the husband have a job? Are the kids being fed, or are they starving, or whatever the case might be? So it is a very sort of visceral experience for people, whether the economy is performing well or not, and I think that does reflect very much in the likelihood of the ruling party doing better or not. I just wanted to pick up on a few things that both Morris and Chris had referred to. The tax funded vouchers. Your point, Chris, about the high support for those. It brings me back to Gumede, William Gumede, who, in fact, funny enough, was an old colleague of mine in the newsroom many years ago. I don't know if he ever thinks back to his days as a cub reporter, but he's certainly moved on to much higher things. But William Gumede, one of the things I thought was very useful about his contribution is that it draws a very clear distinction between opposition to race-based empowerment, which is what is certainly common to our position and his reference to this massive sum of money that's just kind of circulating among this relatively small group of people. He reckons 100 or less than 100. There's that model on the one hand, and the other model he refers to, which he, as I can't remember his exact words, but in the interview he said, stands to benefit lots and lots of people further down the kind of social scale, and that is really what is required. And I think it's important for him to make that distinction, for us to make it too, is that because we oppose race-based empowerment doesn't mean that we completely discard this notion that empowerment is required. And tax-funded vouchers, which Chris mentioned, is precisely one of the measures that we think should be used or should be considered. So you're using public money, but you are stimulating the agency of millions of people instead of simply thinking that if you invest that money in this tiny pool and it circulates and makes a few people rich, that it's actually doing anyone any good at all. And that point that Morris made. Sorry.
When you do kind of models of welfare, models of empowerment, these kind of things, there's lots of different ways you can do things, and you can tax-funded vouchers are still sort of a welfare thing, but what they do is, rather than having bureaucrats, politicians, a small group of people deciding how the money, the resources are allocated, they're trusting people to make the choices in their own lives that will benefit them the most. And that is empowerment, like almost literally exactly empowering people.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And this, speaks to Morris's point about the fact that, so many of the benefits of the sort of kind of post-1994 changes have accrued to this, relatively small body of people. We're still looking at vast swathes of the country living in poverty, joblessness, and so on. So, a real kind of empowerment initiative does the reverse of what we've been looking at the moment. And then, to come back to the story about, whether the ANC would suffer from or benefit by being compelled to change policy. Our colleague Gabriel Krause just, I think last week, in a piece in Business Live, made the point that a new dialogue is taking place on BEE, and it's best to wake up and get serious about it. And he was responding specifically to a chap, Christopher Rutledge, who'd been arguing that this is basically a kind of right-wing racist nonsense, and we need this BEE empowerment. And Gabriel says, as to again bring out Chris's point about the arguments against it. It's not simply one think tank, ourselves, out there who are saying this is not a good thing. This whole notion that there is an issue to be solved, an issue to be reformed and changed, is the Zondo Commission, the IMF, the World Bank, and the Harvard Inclusive Growth Lab. Significant people who are thinking about these problems seriously, taking them seriously. In the case of the Zondo Commission, obviously a very deep stake in our society. So yeah, we're at a point where all these things are up for discussion, as both Chris and Marius have pointed out, and yeah, this is a very good thing.
Indeed, and still the defense of BEE is never on its merits. It's always on this kind of, it's just the beneficiaries of the past desperately trying to cling on to their privilege, which is just, quite frankly, a load of crap. Okay, we've been talking about BEE all week, and yes, it's a major policy puzzle piece in why the country is not functioning properly. But let's change things up.
Sorry, Dick, I just want to say one thing quick as well.
Go ahead.
A lot of people think we're like these mad free market libertarians, and I think I'm personally not opposed to states, like some level of state intervention or whatever the case is. The free market has to be the framework, and I think there's nothing wrong with taxpayers' money helping people who are poorer or on welfare and so on. But that's not what's happening now. Taxpayer money is going to people who already made it, who are already rich, and they don't need any more help. And that's the thing, we aren't helping people who actually need help. And as I say, I don't think there's anything wrong with some welfare to stop somebody from starving. But it's so poorly targeted now. It just goes to rich people or people already, don't really need the help. And I think that's the problem. That's one of the problems we have in this country.
Yeah.
And I think, another thing that I'm often arguing about, partly by virtue of being so old, bit of an old fart, I suppose, but is, not forgetting why we have all these problems, but that we do need to acknowledge that our own history. Just this last week, in a piece that I'm sure the IRR would disagree with completely just about everything in it, I do too. But nevertheless, it contains some very interesting data, and funnily enough, the data comes from the IRR. This is all pre-1994, and this was just a summary of education spending in South Africa between 1953 and 1989. So I just mentioned two figures. In 1953, the spending on African, as it's called here, African education was 17 rand, proportionately to white spending of 128. And if we fast forward to 1989, when things had obviously improved or changed considerably, the discrepancy was still very great. It was 656 rand on Black African education to 2,800, and yet, and the critics of our critics and people who speak up for BEE will often say, if it weren't for BEE, we wouldn't be overcoming these things. But in fact, the dividend of freedom, just the removal of all the impediments and the access to education and opportunities that came with 1994, that is really where the massive change in this society occurred. And that was individuals deciding for themselves that they were going to work hard, get the best matric they could, parents who were making their kids sit down saying, you've got a chance now to get to university. The first kid in this family for 100 years, possibly, or wherever, to get to university, this is the chance. The opportunity has now arisen, go for it. And it's a pity, I should have looked up the figures, but I'm not quite sure, I can't remember where to find them, but IRR figures have shown the massive, France actually often used to emphasize this too, the massive increase in university enrollment in things like engineering and so on, post 1994, where it massively increased without any kind of incursion on the rights or the opportunities of anyone else. It was simply an expansion of people using their agency and in fact ultimately benefiting the country.
Exactly. This is a point that's made on BES. It's sort of like, oh well, we have now a black middle class, and you wouldn't have had that without BE. You wouldn't have had it without people just being given or ordered to be given stuff by the state. But the reality is that millions of South Africans, the moment those apartheid laws crumbled and stopped holding them back from achieving what they could, they began to make improvements in their lives. They began to do what they could with the resources they had. And people started businesses, and people did, saved money and got education and did all the things that they were prevented from doing in the past. And that too has created this black middle class. It is like this weirdly racist argument to sort of almost claim that, no, it's never would have happened unless the government had ordered these evil white capitalists to give a piece of the pie away. It just diminishes the capacity of black South Africans to do things for themselves in this sort of bizarrely paternalistic way.
Exactly. Very good point. Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, let's move on because as I said, we've talked a lot about BE this week. So let's talk about that other sexiest of topics. Morris, you've recently written about local government and why you think it maybe needs some changes in how it's structured. And I think so. Why don't you let's start like this. Why don't you put forward the case to begin with as to what you think needs to be done differently?
Yeah, so I just think our municipalities, especially our metros, are too big, both in terms of how many people they are and the geographical area they cover. I think it's 5 of our metros have more than 4 million people each, That's more people than all of our neighboring countries except for Mozambique and Zimbabwe. The whole of Namibia only has about 3 million people. And if you look at how it works in big cities around the world, most of them don't have this kind of unitary government. London, I always like to look at London as an example. It's probably the foreign city I know the best. London's got about, I think, about 12 million people and does have one centralized authority. It's got a mayor and it's got a London Assembly, but the London Assembly, which people elect, has only got 25 members. And the city itself is broken up into 32 boroughs, which then each have a number of councillors, and they have their own mayor and so on. And each of those boroughs is responsible. They have quite a lot of responsibilities. They're responsible for collecting rubbish, for the roads in the borough, for schools, for social services. So they're quite important. But you bring government much closer to people, I think, and it's much easier to manage than what we have today. We've seen nearly all our metros, except with the exception of Cape Town, really, are all run very poorly. And this obviously not a silver bullet, but I think we do need to start looking at. There has to be some sort of reform, and I think we also need to look at more rural municipalities. A lot of them simply don't have any kind of rate space. It doesn't make sense for them to manage their own affairs. Maybe they should actually be governed from the center, whether it's the provincial center or the national center. Some people say, well, that goes. I'm also I quite like things like devolution, but we can't have like one size fits all models. If a municipality can't run itself, then somebody else needs to run it, whether, as I say, from the provincial capital or the national capital. And if an entity is capable of running itself, then more power should be devolved to it. So, I mean, Western Cape, for example, that if it can take over more responsibilities, it should be allowed to do that. So, yeah, I think we need to start thinking of different ways of doing things, because municipal government is not working. And it's also the, level of government that obviously most people interact with most. It's, we all have to pay our rates and taxes. We all drive on the roads in the municipality, whatever the case is. We all have our rubbish collected. And so it's a very important level of government, actually. And I think it's neglected quite a lot. And I don't know. I think it's also difficult. We might see turkeys voting for Christmas if you're getting these big municipalities broken up. And I think another problem is, say you had to break up Joburg into, say, 5 smaller municipalities. Probably 2 or 3 other municipalities would be run by the DA. And they might even have DA majority. Say if you broke Bryanston and Sandton up into its own municipality, that it could get a DA majority there possibly. And that's also something that I don't think the ANC would be too keen on.
So, Morris, I'm going to push back slightly. I know, horror of horrors, on one of your points here. I am almost always skeptical of sort of central authority getting involved, and I understand what you're saying. You can imagine a very impoverished municipality in like rural Limpopo, and the services have kind of fallen apart completely, and it's not politically competitive. It's just sort of one party dominance kind of thing, and there's no rate space, there's nothing. How is the municipality going to provide services? And so I think it is very tempting to say, okay, well, maybe the provincial government or the national government should at least temporarily run the thing. But I think that probably does create more problems than it solves, because it kind of can end up becoming a bit of a crutch, I think, where you have the sort of authority swooping in to do things, and you break that a kind of the very important key accountability link between the sort of local government and the people in the municipality. The people in the municipality ultimately have to be the ones who drive the change. And in part, they can only do that if your society is, for example, experiencing economic growth and people are getting opportunities and are, moving away to seek better opportunities, or are, have some money to invest in interacting with government. They're not like desperate for these municipal services, or else they're going to die. So I think the thing I'm talking about can only really be done in a society where we have the national level policy at the right place. But I do think that is ultimately the best model, and that we should be very cautious about this kind of intervention. At the end of the day, if the citizens of a municipality are not either not able or not willing or not engaged in making their local government accountable and doing the things that needs to be done, it doesn't matter how much intervention you're going to have, you're never actually going to solve the problems of misgovernance. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Anyway,
Sorry, I was looking for the unmute button.
sorry, leave it in my.
Yeah, I agree. It's I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but I think just we need to start talking about I think we need to start rethinking municipal government. And I'm not saying what I proposed is a silver bullet, but I think it's not working, and we just need to start thinking about other ways of doing it. And I think we just need to start having that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a very healthy thing.
Chris, what's your take on this whole thing? I mean, I know Cape Town. I think I'm not entirely familiar how it works. I think it's got sub councils, is a bit more devolved. In your opinion, do you think that's played a part in the city functioning better?
I do think political governance, has a lot to do with it. I mean, in 2009, I remember, I have a document here somewhere, the then Department of Provincial and Local Government was issuing a turnaround strategy 9 years after local government was restructured. So there's structural problems, and the ANC's cadre deployment is one of them. And I think that the ANC, when they went into the reorganization in 2000, was arguing that making municipalities more centralized would be a good outcome, but it clearly isn't the case. Most of these municipalities, I did the research into Mpumalanga municipalities when our campaigns team went to visit the Garambeki municipality, and most of their annual reports, their document management is completely shocking, by the way. Some of their annual reports is missing documents. They don't even want to speak to their own councillors. I mean, that's just the height of laziness. Then there's the Auditor General that's issuing local government audit outcomes. I mean, I think she said 41 of South Africa's 257 municipalities achieved clean audits. There's something clearly wrong. But we need to bomb these municipalities because we need to start over. We really need to start over.
Yeah, no. One shudders to even think how you begin fixing some of those municipalities in Mpumalanga. Michael, your thoughts on this one?
I mean, I was just thinking while Marius was chatting about Cape Town's relatively recent municipal history. So before 1994, I mean, there were the separate council for Simonstown, Fishhook. I can't even remember the ones here in the southern suburbs, but I think there were a few, Pinelands maybe, certainly Bill, which probably be the area that would cover where you're living, Chris. And so, the big argument obviously was 1994, we need to rationalize, this is terribly inefficient, there's duplication of all kinds of stuff. Let's just, bring it all together. It was a huge and complex process. I was a minister report at some point covering some of that stuff. And then, of course, before 94, the councillors were non-political formally, although informally, I think the Cape Town City Council was admirably kind of liberal and progressive, and often went head-to-head with the government on everything from housing to beaches to whatever. But it was, it's non-party political at any rate. So as soon as it became party political, then, it's a whole new ball game. Parties had an interest in finding ways to achieve a greater presence and greater influence. So that did complicate it. But to speak also to Morris's point about, rationalization is this great buzzword, kind of euphemistic, horrible word, which is meant to mean, everything's made more organized and more efficient and so on, but often it doesn't. But on the other hand, I mean, I'm a devolution advocate to some extent, but I also think that a strong central authority or a strong centralizing sort of source of authority is very important in everything from policing to local government. And I'm thinking of the instance of a place like Bloemfontein, which I know sort of vicariously. My wife's family are from there, and we used to visit often. And in the past, I've just spoken to somebody the last weekend who happens also to have come from Bloemfontein and just recently revisited for a school reunion, and spoke about how, contrary to about 10 years of decline and rubbish on pavements and roads with potholes and big, holes being drilled for dug for bulk services and then being left for months and months without anything happening. All that's been cleared away, and it's all now cleaned up. Things seem to be running smoothly. There's no longer piles of black bags on pavements on Refuse Day. Stuff seems to be happening, and this is purely because the Treasury stepped in, placed it under whatever it's called, administration, and I think and outsourced all these services, and paid people to do it, and now it's working fantastically. So I think I agree with Morris. It's a question of keeping an open mind and making this debate happen, rather than simply saying, oh, I'm opposed to centralization. We're not going to have that conversation. I think it's helpful just to say, okay, well, let's talk about every possibility. Let's look at small municipalities that maybe don't need all that palaver of the kind of local authority, but so long as there is accountability in there and there is efficiency in the delivery of services.
So I do think that what's needed, kind of more fundamentally, and this is obviously a project that can last a century. So I'm thinking very long term here. I'm not expecting the same time soon, but you really do need to have a kind of political culture of engagement, just generally, I think, from people. And I think local government is a good place to begin growing that engagement. I think it's you need citizens who know their rights, who demand responsibilities of other citizens and also of their government, and are paying attention, are actively engaged. South Africa doesn't have these things right now. We've got, and one of my colleagues here can remind me of the number, but we have this huge chunk of South Africans who don't vote. We have this huge chunk of South Africans who are not really engaged in the political process to any major degree. Maybe they do vote sometimes, but they otherwise don't really pay attention. And I think that that's ultimately not very healthy. I mean, people mustn't become obsessed with politics, because that's also bad. It ruins your life in other ways. But there's a sort of healthy medium here where you can be an active and engaged citizen who demands certain things, and you show up to that town meeting even though it's kind of boring, where you talk about the decision that needs to be made, or you sign the petition, or you make the petition, or you just you're not afraid of getting involved, joining a political party, doing these sort of things. You have a slightly more activist citizenry, and I think this is if the whole country, or at least most of the country, was filled with citizens who were like that, who took their citizenship and participation in democracy way more seriously, we would be in a better place generally. I think this is not just true for South Africa, it's true all over the world, that when you have kind of an almost apathetic citizenship, it's very easy for bad governance to kind of creep in the door, because then when people do kind of switch on to politics 5 minutes before the election, they just see a whole bunch of noise and campaign messages, and then they often might end up making a voting decision that's based off of not always a great reason.
Sounds like you're calling for a revolution.
I'm calling, I'm calling for the most boring revolution. It's not the burning down buildings or setting fire to things and like throwing stuff at police. It's a revolution of showing up to a meeting and patiently waiting your turn to make a point, of being responsible, of doing these things. I know I'm very boring, but this is, I think, the only way that we can actually develop ultimately a healthier society.
I think of it.
All right.
Can I just say something quickly? I think of it as a wake-up call. I remember when I voted for the first time in 2021, I cried after I voted. I think the rest of the people over there, they were just there on autopilot, like something like a big box. They just get it done, over and done with. Each election, they just go to vote. Here's an opportunity, boof, buff, out the door. It's over and done with, and then they forget about it.
You see, like a lot of people listening might think that's kind of silly, but Chris, that's exactly right. You should feel emotional after you've cast your first ballot, because it's an important right of being a citizen.
Exactly.
No, 100% agree.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, thinking in terms of where we are at the moment nationally with the Government of National Unity Coalition politics, which Morris has written about a lot, it's exactly that quality, Chris. I think that people have perhaps are in a position now to rediscover that we are in a phase where it can really count, and it does actually count. It's not a fated condition. Our condition is not. We're not destined to be one thing or another. we can actually step in there, participate, and make a change. So yeah, I think it's a very good point.
It's also depressing that Chris's first election, first vote was in 2021. And the first time I voted was literally in the last century, and for a party that no longer exists. It exists in a new form, so just so people don't think I voted for like the soccer party or Dacha party or something. But
yeah. On that hopeful note, which is, I think, rare sometimes for the Daily Friend Show, let's call it to a close there. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. We hope that you found the show interesting, informative, thought-provoking. There were some other stories we're going to cover, but I think let's leave those for next week because I didn't want to end this too much of a downer. Cheers, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.